My name is Kyle Wilbur, and I am the State Program Manager for the Northern Border Regional Commission, and I am joined by Christine, who is the Program Director for the entire four-state program and is housed in New Hampshire. Today we're going to talk about the MBRC. I see on the list some familiar names, so that's good, and I guess some others who haven't maybe been aware of the program or would like some additional information. So what is MBRC? MBRC is a regional commission that was established in 2008. It includes the four states of Maine, New Hampshire, New York, and Vermont, as well as the federal government. It is federally supported financially, so every year Congress, we hope, makes an appropriation to the program to be shared basically equally amongst all four states, and we'll talk about how much money we have available this year. The purpose of the program, as you'll see, is to support the economies of communities in our region. In New York, when the program began, we had 14 counties. At the end of last year, that was expanded, and we'll talk about that as well. But we're really interested and focused on, while MBRC is a very flexible and innovative program, again, the main purpose of all the things that we do is to support the communities in the region to either grow economically or sustain infrastructure that they have currently. This is the map of the region, and you'll see in the southern part of the New York, southern part of the commission itself, which is us in New York. Up until last year, the counties of Sullivan, Greene, Rensselaer, and many of the western counties were not eligible for MBRC funding, but with the adoption of the 2018 Farm Bill, there were some counties added to New York as well as Vermont and maybe others, right, Christine? Does other states have counties?
Yes.
Yes.
Excuse me?
Basically in New York, we went from 14 to 28, which is good.
Yeah, you doubled.
Yeah. So, again, I mentioned earlier that this is federal funding that is really, it's federal funding that is directed by the states and the regions, which is what makes it unique in my mind. The commission itself is governed by a federal co-chair who is Harold Parker. Harold is the presidential appointee to the commission, and how it works is Harold has one vote, and the four state leaders all have a combined one vote. So the four states make up, the state partnership, and that includes my boss, Governor Cuomo's alternate to the commission, Mark Pattison, myself as program manager, and then we work very closely with the staff in New Hampshire, the commission staff, which is supported by both state and federal funding. Christine, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about the commission itself, and I'll come back on in a few minutes.
Sure. Hello. Like Kyle said, this is Christine Frost with the Northern Border Regional Commission. This just gives you a little bit of a background about NBRC and what has happened over the last few years. Like Kyle said, we were actually created in 2008. We didn't receive appropriations from Congress until 2010. So in the last 8-year time period since we've been receiving appropriations, we've made approximately 201 awards and have made investments of about $42 million. And that breaks down into, a whole variety of different types of projects that we've funded, from broadband down to local technical assistance to improve skill sets for workers and those types of things. In the past fiscal year, for 2008, we actually had about 89 applications for totaling about $26 million. 46 of those were awarded back in July, August of 2018 to the tune of about $11 million. Of that, one thing that's pretty unique about Northern Border Regional Commission is we can really be one of the first entities into a project. So we give an entire year to put your funding together, so we feel really confident that we can talk about actually leveraging all those additional funds. And in last year's program, we had about a 1 to 4.5 ratio of what MBRC put in and what the leveraged match was. We're already looking at, based on the letters of notification that we've received, approximately 150 or so applications that we're expecting to see in 2019. So to kind of give an idea of some of the things that we're going to be talking about, so we're trying to help with some of the confusion over the two different programs that we have right now. So you can see by this slide that in 2018 we had a $15 million appropriation. Of that, I just talked about the state economic and infrastructure development grants for that $11 million. There was an additional $3 million that Congress asked us to set aside. And they asked us specifically to provide that $3 million to those communities for purposes to alleviate some of the impact of the change in the forest economy specifically. And that was the extent of the guidance that we received. In 2019, there's $20 million available for
Did folks just lose Christine? Hey, can folks hear me? This is Kyle.
I can hear you.
Okay, good. So I can pick up. Christine hopefully will join back. So what Christine was alluding to was Congress made a special directive to the Commission to invest a portion of our annual allocation to a special forest-based economy partnership initiative, which the Commission itself decided to put into a regional solicitation for $7 million, which is actually on the street currently, and we'll talk about that later. So what's going on this year? Some of you, in fact, may have submitted a letter of notification to the Commission by March 29th. This was not required, but as the slide said, it was appreciated. The idea was to get an idea of who may be applying, what the long-term need might be for this year, and also to enable us to provide any feedback to folks who submitted a letter of notification. They were not required, of course. Applications are due May 10th. The application portal itself has been posted to the Commission's website, mbrc.gov, and you can actually start filling out your application, and then you'll see the rest of the cycle. The important thing to remember is you shouldn't start your project until you receive a notice to proceed. And the reason why the notice to proceed at the bottom is September 30th, 2020 is MBRC gives folks a year to secure all the match required for the program. And we will talk about the specific match requirements for the Commission and based upon what county you are in. There is a mandatory grant recipient webinar that folks will have to attend to go over the specifics of the contract and grants management process. This year, this number is technically correct. It changes potentially based upon recoveries that we may receive during the summer. 14 million roughly Commission-wide, just over 3.5 million will be available to communities in New York State. This is a map of the county economic designations. The statute requires MBRC to define the economic designation of each county in the region. The Commission contracted with Plymouth State University to do that. The dark green are counties that are listed as distressed, requiring a 20% match requirement. The lighter green are counties that are listed as transitional, which require a 50% match, and then the even lighter green are counties that are attainment counties that, unless you have funding that goes to distressed census tracts, those counties are ineligible for funding. So who is eligible? The eligible grants The grant eligible applicants include state governments, local governments, Indian tribes, regional planning commissions, and those organizations that are authorities that have their authority granted to them by the state, like IDAs and those types of organizations. Nonprofits are not eligible. And in addition, any prior recipient that does not have 75% of their project complete and reimbursed will not be eligible for a grant during a program year. So if you have a project under contract and you're wishing to apply, work hard to get it done before summer. What are the eligible categories? There are 7. This list condenses them into 4. But infrastructure is the priority of the commission. What that means is the commission has to spend 40% of its funding on infrastructure projects. Infrastructure includes, as you'll see, transportation, basic public infrastructure, which is water, wastewater, and telecommunications. Other funding categories include workforce development, basic health care and public services to distressed areas, tourism, and renewable energy. Funding cannot be used as pass-through funding. We can't use funding to assist with business relocation initiatives or to supplant other federal programs. And really, this is meant to be a strategic investment in communities that otherwise might be under recognized by other federal programs. And that's really, this program was created based upon the Appalachian Regional Commission program, which is now 55 years old, started in 1965, 54 years old. And that was created due to a study that identified that, Appalachia wasn't receiving its fair share of federal dollars, and that's really the reason for this program too. The communities are more remote and can be less involved. You saw the map of the counties. This slide goes into a little more detail on match, sort of what we already covered. But the funding caps are as such. We enable applicants to apply for up to $500,000 for infrastructure projects. Those 3 priority funding areas: broad telecommunications, transportation, public infrastructure, and $250,000 for all other project types. And that's pretty straightforward. Grants are reimbursement grants for previously paid and eligible expenses. I mentioned the match. One unique thing about these federal partnerships, like Appalachia, you can use other federal dollars as program match. However, there can be no more than 80% federal funding in a project, which is a key, a key point. This is just a highlight of what you already saw for New York, but it provides the county names in a little more detail. Basically the original counties up until last year included, the counties in and around the Adirondack Park mostly, and a few counties around Syracuse, but it was significantly expanded to the west and added a few counties to the south. And it sounds like Christine is back, so I will take a break and let her expand on eligible match.
Can you hear me, Kyle? Hello?
Hi, Christine.
Hi. So did you want to go back to that slide for just a second?
I would love to.
Yeah. So this is, what this is showing folks is the distress criteria. So those counties, Warren, Saratoga, Rensselaer, and Schenectady, in those counties, and maybe you said this and I missed it, Kyle, there is a minimum 50% match required. In the remainder of all of New York, there's actually a 20% minimum match. Many of the projects that we get from New York are well over match because they're larger construction projects, but those are the minimum match that are required based on the distress criteria that is done every year. In order to be Let's see, eligible match. So if we want to talk about a little bit more from match, which is bringing us to this page here, this is a great place if people have specific questions and they want to write it down on the chat. We're happy to kind of interact a little bit. But the eligible match can be really just about anything other than, you know, there is a maximum cap of 80% of any other federal dollars. So volunteer time, indirect, if folks don't know a municipal force account, that's typically your public works folks. So if you have a municipal project that you're doing and you want your municipal folks to actually do some of the work themselves on installation of piping or anything like that, we can work with that in kind or donations, just about anything, as long as we're able to figure out how to document it. We definitely encourage multi-state, multi-county applications, and in order to determine what the match is on those, anything that is more than one county, no matter if it's in another state or within the same state or whatever, is just an average of those counties to determine what your minimum match requirement is. So there are some things that have changed since 2018, and so we just want to call those to people's attention in case people had filled out the application from 2018 and were curious what those changes might be. So every year, the state priorities, we reassess those because obviously states may have their own planning programs and different strategies that are guiding their own investments, and so we want to make sure that we're including those. So we do look at the state priorities. And Kyle, maybe you can talk a little bit about you know, how those may have changed in New York in a minute. There, as we've said a number of times already, the counties have changed as far as there's been a large expansion in New York. Specifically, we did add the entire state of Vermont and then 2 additional counties in New Hampshire, and that was done through the reauthorization process that was signed into law back in December. So additional counties will not be added until our reauthorization is up for additional consideration 5 years from now. The distress criteria changes every year. We're required by law to look at what the distressed issues are and how we're looking at that, and so that we have an assessment that's done every fall for the next fiscal year. So those have changed a little bit. I will say that the only change that has happened in New York is that those additional counties that weren't there last year, there are some of those that are in the transitional area of distress, but the remainder of New York has remained in that 80-20 match range. There's a new budget form. I think if people have not already looked at this, it would definitely be very important for you to look at the budget form that's going to be required for this new grant round. It is a lot more extensive. I have been told by a number of people that it's not complicated. It just takes a little bit more thought into thinking about how the project is being developed. And so I would definitely urge you to look at that way before you're submitting your application. And all of this can be found on the MBRC website at mbrc.gov. So just some things about project implementation. We hopefully will be making announcements the end of July, beginning of August. We need to have the grant agreement signed and in place. And then funding needs to be in place. Oh, I see what this is really to do with notices to proceed. It's a process that has been put in place to make sure that we understand that the program or project that's being implemented is actually ready to be move forward. So in order to do that, we really need the signed grant agreement in place, which generally we make sure happens before the end of September. And then once all of the funding is in place and that we have sort of there's a form that you will fill out that says here's where all of our funding comes from, that we understand the ownership interests, and everything is complete and ready to go. We will issue a notice to proceed. No funding will be, we will not allow funding to be paid for any funds that are distributed prior to receiving a notice to proceed. So if you've already done your engineering, say this spring or fall, or this spring or the summer, that should be not included in your total project cost, so that we can make sure that we can pay for all of those things that are part of the MBRC project.
Christine, it's Kyle. I mentioned earlier when you took a break that they have a year to get all the funding in place if necessary.
Yep. Yep. There's a question here that says, is a harbor rehabilitation of $20 million eligible? So in and of itself, that question is yes, but there needs to be more conversation about like what that project actually is. So the quick answer would be yes, that's an eligible use. However, who owns that property, who the applicant is, you know, those sort of things should be looked at as well. As long as the harbor is owned by a eligible applicant, then it would be an eligible use of funds. Is that helpful?
I think it's helpful, Christina. This is Kyle.
Yeah.
You know, and they responded, yes, good. You know, it's just, we always look at the return too. I mean, we want to invest in larger projects, but sometimes our small investment on a $20 million project might not make or break it. So, you know, it'll go through our review lens and compete against every other project and see where it comes out.
So the next slide says, are you prepared to submit an application? And so I think when you're looking at the project that you're developing, here's some of the things to kind of keep in mind. You know, can you actually get all of your funding in line by the end of September 2020? So one of the amazing flexible things about MBRC funds is you could indeed apply for funds and get those funds and then still go to town council or town meeting or whatever sometime over the winter and be able to put the rest of those funds together for your project, which is a nice thing about these funds to be able to do. However, if you don't think you can actually get all of your funds together by the end of September 2020, then you may want to really sort of assess, you know, whether you're really ready to be submitting this application now, or is it something that this time next year you might want to entertain. So make sure that you can actually get all of those funds together within a year, but you do have that year. It's really important that we are dealing with eligible entities. We have a number of questions sometimes, and this tends to get more complicated in the broadband world, but we'll have folks ask us, can we apply for funds and then give it to a for-profit business? We cannot do that. So any funds that are received need to be kept within those eligible entities. You can certainly have partners that you're working with, but all of those partners need to be eligible entities. There needs to be a clear scope of work. I think we hope anyway that our new budget is going to help people kind of define some of their scope of work, but it's really important that, and Kyle will speak to this, I'm sure, that that reviewers need to really understand what it is that you're going to get accomplished. So I always tell folks to give their scope of work to someone who has no knowledge of what it is that you're doing, and if they don't understand what you're doing, then maybe you should make some tweaks on that so that it's really clear what you're getting accomplished. Has a budget, same thing with your budget, has it been vetted, and do you actually have some sense of those costs? We sometimes get projects that are way under budget because they haven't looked at that through the lens of an actual engineer. So get some actual figures from your engineers or your public works folks or whatever, and make sure that there's some sense of understanding about what the true costs are going to be. Because the one thing that we can't do, because we have a really pretty small pot of funds, if you think about it, to go around for 4 states. Those funds are dispersed every year. We don't have any additional funds left over in any capacity to assist those projects when there's overruns. And then the whole idea of ownership or control, and that's just making sure that, you know, you really do have the authority to be doing the work on the project that you are proposing, such as if you are an entity that's looking at doing trails, do you have all the proper authorities to be on those trails doing those types of projects? Let's see, since most of the land is privately owned, can put together some sort of agreement to make that. Oh, okay. So this is, I think this person is talking about that same harbor rehabilitation, and that sounds like it should be a conversation perhaps with Kyle or myself offline. It sounds like it might be a little complicated with the ownership issues. So instead of answering that here, if you want to give one of us a call, that would probably be the best thing. So I'll keep going. We're going to talk a little bit about the Regional Forest Economy Partnership. Do you want to move that next slide? There we go. So as we said in the beginning of this, and we sort of demonstrated those little buckets there, we have approximately $7 million in a new program called the Regional Forest Economy Partnership. This was really set up to look at how those communities that were most impacted by the shift and the change in the forest economy, and how we can help those with these chronic and consistent declines of their downtowns, and how we can revitalize and really use that workforce in other ways, or are there ways that we can still look at extraction of forest products and that sort of thing in a way that leverages the entire region. And so we're looking for investments that really are transformative, that can have an impact on potentially a supply chain within the whole region, or some other large-scale project that could change the sort of economy of many communities versus one. So in the Regional Forest Economy Partnership, we have a sort of a rolling, if you will, opportunity. There are a number of opportunities to submit invitations, letters of interest. We received 25 letters of interest on March 15th. There is another round that will start at due on May 15th, and then if funds are still available after those 2 rounds, we will have a 3rd round of funding on September 15th. Like I said, there is approximately $7 million in this initiative. This initiative is different and unique from our other regular grant round, in which we have the applications come in. The letters of interest are actually reviewed by an external advisory panel. That advisory panel will provide recommendations to the full commission. The full commission will then invite those that they really feel could be meeting the goals of transforming this region, and they will invite those back to a full application. So we will not be taking applications unless they have been invited for an application. And those full applications, as you can see from this, are then due on May and July and in November on the 15th. And I think I'll stop there as far as the timing goes. Basically, we have to follow our same congressional directives for all of these, whereas we still need to look at our distress criteria that we use for our regular grant round. 50% of appropriations need to be in those distressed areas, and 40% of our appropriations need to be for infrastructure. The same goes as far as eligible applicants. All of the applicants need to be your governmental entities or subdivisions, nonprofits, Indian tribes, those types of things. And again, the same thing with the federal cap. So all of our general regulations for how we administer these funds remain the same for this program. It's just the objective of it is different, and it is across the 4 states as opposed to having individual states review only their applications. So we did a little bit of work to try to figure out how to talk about what communities were most impacted. That was the directive that we were given by Congress, is to have these funds go into those areas most impacted. So we first needed to figure out who they were. So we did a couple of things that were somewhat obvious, like actually pinpoint the mills and the sawmills that had closed in the last 20 years or so. And you can see the map on your right indicates those. So we sort of lit up those counties that were the most impacted in the immediate region. The map to your left demonstrates your annual payroll per county. And we got, in order to figure out like where were the areas that were most distressed. So you can see the areas of the dark blue are those areas that, yes, if you can read that, it actually says negative 53% decline in payroll within that 10-year time period from 2005 to 2016. And then there's 2 other maps on the next page that we also looked at, if you want to flip forward. Population is definitely something that is of interest to people as far as out-migration goes, and that really has a negative pull on your local economies, so we looked at that. But probably the most pertinent to this particular issue was to look at those payrolls within the industry of the forest economy. So we looked at logistics, we looked at the wood products industry, the natural resource industry, and we said, you know, where is that change of payroll within those counties, specifically within that industry. So this really gave us a sense that we were kind of really narrowing in on those areas that were most impacted by the change in the forest industry. So these maps were in a way used as a threshold to say, you know, these are the areas that we're going to be focusing the most on when we're dispersing these funds.
Oh, sorry. So, Christine, just before we move on, there was a question that I don't want to miss about the 75% completion requirement, and basically, is that required by this summer or next if you're an applicant? It should be this, right?
So the commission decided that they wanted to make sure that funds were dispersed in a broad way, and so with the state economic development and infrastructure grant opportunity that we have out, there's a requirement that if you already have a project underway, it needs to be at least 75% done in order to apply for additional funds. But that's with the state economic and infrastructure development grant. There was no such cap put on this regional forest economy partnership by the commission. So they did not, that is not part of this. So if someone currently has a grant in our regular grant round, they do not have to have that complete in order to apply for the regional forest economy partnership.
Thank you.
Again, I think I went over this a little bit, but here's the real difference between this and our regular grant round is that there's an evaluation team external to MBRC and the states who are reviewing these applications, and then they are providing a recommendation to the commission of who to submit for applications. The commission still meets after their own review and takes the recommendations by this committee under their guidance, and then in addition to their own information decides who they will invite back for a full application. This is a very different process than our regular grant round, which really is a state-by-state decision about which applications will be funded. You have 2 years to complete the project, and a smaller window of 6 months to actually put all of your funding together, which is really important because we want these projects to really be moving forward in a more timely manner than maybe a construction project at a municipal level. And they really need to be regional in scope. I think we've already said that. So I think I'm going to turn it over to Kyle.
Yeah,
Kyle's going to talk.
It's a good point to stop because we're going to go over, some of the unique things about the New York part of the program. But there was another question about whether a consultant can submit the application on behalf of municipalities need to come from the owner. We have to have a resolution of support, correct, Christine? But
yes.
That doesn't mean the consultant can't help.
No, absolutely, they certainly can. When you are actually in there's two different opportunities that we're talking about. The Regional Forest Economy Partnership, that actually comes via email to MBRC itself, and so anyone could submit that on behalf of someone. However, yes, indeed, there needs to be authorization to do so. When you get to our regular state infrastructure and development grant, the grant portal requires that authorized person to submit the application. So a person who's assisting or a grant writer or whatever could actually put the information together and submit it, but it gets submitted to the email address of the authorized official, and that authorized official actually has to submit the application.
Thank you. So to end the webinar, and then following that we'll do any other questions, but we want to just go over a few things about the New York program. As Christine mentioned, for the annual cycle, which I think most of you are probably interested in right now, the Commission developed an online application process that all 4 states use. So all the applications go into that portal. They are reviewed by Commission staff for eligibility and completeness and the 75% rule generally. And then they get redistributed back out to the 4 states. New York's projects come here, obviously, and then us at the Division of Local Government Services review them based upon the scoring threshold. Again, that's what I believe is great about the program, is the ability for the states to help direct the funding based upon the regional recommendations. This is just a map that I thought was unique. Some of you on the phone may know about the Appalachian program, which we previously mentioned. But if you look at this map, there are 57 counties outside of New York State that are in New York. Now, after the end of last year, 42 of those counties reside in an area covered by a regional commission. The majority of the counties have a unique opportunity to apply for community and economic development funding. Now, in the blue counties, Appalachia, the process is different, but we're talking about the green counties, obviously, so those applications will be done through the online portal. This is just a brief overview of what we received in New York last year for applications based upon funding. We did not receive any energy or healthcare projects, and really traditionally, this is what we see. We see, half or a significant amount of our requests coming for infrastructure, and then, a distribution amongst the other categories. Last year we had telecommunications, transportation, tourism, and workforce development. These are the counties. These do not include the 14 new counties, but traditionally we get most of our applications from the North Country, Jefferson, Lewis, Essex, St. Lawrence, counties like that. Last year we received an application from Oneida County, which we actually funded. Herkimer, I think, was one of the ones we hadn't received many from. We funded a project there. So our distribution is growing, and when we talk about our review criteria, you'll see that we take into distribution as best we can during our review process. This is the chart showing our awards since 2010. very similar to the applications from last year. Infrastructure takes up about half, and when we started the review, I think I've said this before, when we started the review and the program was brought to the Department of State, we made a conscious effort to prioritize infrastructure. That was what the Commission's authorizing legislation required, and we wanted to make sure that with it being such a new program, we were meeting the letter of the law, and also we felt infrastructure could show an immediate return. In the last year or so, we've tried to tone that down a little bit, recognizing the 40% rule still applies. So we're interested in getting applications across the whole spectrum of eligible categories. And we've actually funded projects in every one, even, healthcare was small, transportation, tourism. So really, these projects are unique to the communities that they come from. You know what you need, you know what's missing, and like Christine said, you need to tell that story to folks that in many cases don't know your story. So I use an example usually when folks call me and they say, what do you want us to do with your money? And my response is, it's really not my money. I don't know what you need. You need to tell us what you need, and we can help you get it and understand how other communities have done similar things. Again, this is just the award distribution by county. It doesn't include the new ones again, but you can see that many of the upstate counties, not only are they the ones that supply the most applications, but they're also the ones that have received the majority of the funding. So our criteria, as I mentioned, I don't know if it was talked about, Christine, but when we went to the online portal, the decision was made to basically split the 100 points for review into 50 for commission priorities and requirements, and then give each state 50 points for their own unique criteria. Although the reviews are still done all by the states, we just allocate half the points to commission criteria. And that includes how the project meets the priorities of the commission's strategic plan, those types of things. This is New York's criteria. We take a serious approach to the regional significance and the long-term impacts. We prioritize job creation and retention, investment in downtowns. That doesn't mean you have to be a big city with a downtown. That just means that you may have a main street you want to reinvest in, or some type of plan that focuses your development in a strategic area of your community. Like I mentioned earlier, we try to look at geographic distribution. So if we have projects that are basically equal in score, equal in impact, and we haven't hit a community either ever or in a long time, we'll consider that. And then it's hard to define, but we want to try to fund unique projects and innovative projects, and that can be either regionally or within your community. How well can you define the opportunity to the community and how critical that need is? How clear are the outputs? So we look at, a lot of our scoring is to, the main point Christine made earlier, how well can you define what you're going to be doing? We don't want projects that are languishing for that long, in communities that, last week decided, hey, let's do something. We want thought to go into the process prior. So we prioritize, the return, the capacity, how ready you are for the project. So that's our priorities. I'm going to go over just a few examples, and then we do have a few questions we'll get to at the end. And you folks on the phone may be familiar with some of these. When we first got the program at the OS, we funded a project in Clayton on the St. Lawrence River. They were redeveloping a brownfield site they had redeveloped. They had reclaimed a brownfield site and needed to get infrastructure back to that to be able to market it. And they had folks interested in hotel development. We didn't invest in the hotel. We invested in the infrastructure to the parcel for the Clayton Harbor Hotel, which is pretty neat. I haven't stayed there. I've been there and looked at it, and I like it. Hudson Headwaters in Clinton County needed to expand, actually build a new community health center. due to a 30% increase at the existing facility. They applied to MBRC and got funds in 2014 to help with fitting that facility up. Clarkson University in Potsdam has received, I think, 2 awards now to help with expanding their business incubation program. You know, Clarkson has a lot of smart engineering students that have ideas, and they try to help them commercialize those and spin those off as business startups. I think this is one grant. I believe we've invested in, not the same facility, but their programs twice now. And the Port of Oswego received funding to build a rail spur to expand the capacity at their port. That was 2013. This has been a successful expansion. So that's what I have. That's what Christine has. We have some questions that we'll try to get to, and we have a few more minutes. So I only see 2 new ones. One is there a place to see previously funded projects? The answer is yes. If you go to MBRC's site, you can click on any of the 4 states, and the list of all the previously funded projects are there and are very helpful. And it's unique to notice how different types of projects are funded between different states. You know, Vermont's a smaller state. I believe they do more on sort of the resource and tourism side. We've chosen more infrastructure. I think Maine has been in sort of that arena as well. Would a replacement water tower be eligible for funding? I'll start this, but you may want to finish it, Christine. Potentially, what the program rules say is we don't fund general operation and maintenance. So, you know, the applicant would have to describe how this water tower is, you know, a critical piece in sustaining the economy or expanding capacity for new opportunities. Does that make sense, Christine? Christine may not be there, but that's my take on that. And again, we can talk.
I think I was on mute. Sorry about that.
Okay.
In fact, I think I put back a note there that, you know, in order to be competitive, it really needs to have an economic need, right? Like, so is it, do you need that to be expanded because, you know, new businesses can't move in because you don't have the current capacity or something like that, versus it's just regular maintenance?
Right. That's the only other question I see. I don't know if anybody has any. Again, like our contact information is on the screen. We can take questions offline, either of us, about the program. And I think that's all I have. Christine, do you have anything to add?
No. Other than I think we're very easy, both of us, to get in touch with, to provide information if people are confused or if there's, you know, questions or whatever. I strongly urge folks to go to the website and read the application manual, so that gives you a whole background and all of the dates and everything else, and it will give you a lot of familiarity about the program before you actually start filling out the application.
There's a question about a copy of the webinar. Yes, we will try to email a copy out to everybody who signed up. Okay, well, thank you. I hope this was helpful. If anybody has any suggestions about, you know, how we might change this outreach, that'd be great.
And thank you, Kyle and John, for setting up the whole webinar. Appreciate it.
Yeah, shout out to John Patata, who's my colleague at the Department of State, who was more smarter on these things than I could ever be. So, thank you. Have a nice day, everyone.
All right, thanks.
Bye-bye.
All right, bye.